computer. I will share the screen.
Sorry.
Okay, I'll move. I mentioned before about the cursor. It looks a bit different. I had a complaint that people couldn't see it properly. Okay, so the microbiome is all about the amazing population of microorganisms that we carry with us. Now, I've mentioned it before in other talks, earlier talks, and but I'll go into much more detail. Now, I just realized I didn't hit mute. I'll have to go back. I'll have to go back. Okay, here we'll start again. Okay, what is the microbiome? Okay, so first definition, a biome is a community, it's a group of plants and animals. So by community meaning different plants, different animals, and they have certain characteristics for their environment they live in. So if you go to your backyard, there's a microbiome there. So you have plants, you have animals, you have microorganisms in your backyard, specifically in your backyard. And if you go next door to your neighbor and have a look there, it may be similar, but they'll be different because you may have used different fertilizer, you may have done something different, or your neighbor has. So it's highly unlikely that there'll be two identical conditions in each backyard. If you go to a forest, you can go underwater. They're everywhere. So biomes occur wherever we have living things. Now, they are distinct, very distinct biological communities. Now, a community is a group of different living things. It's not just a group of magpies. It's where the magpies are and everything else that's living around them. And they have formed because these groups, because they respond to a particular climate, wherever they live. So there are different sorts of biomes. So for example, on land, we have a temperate deciduous forest. Now, temperate means it's not too hot, not too cold, not too wet, not too dry, just nicely in between. And deciduous means that they lose their leaves. So we don't have them in Australia, but in Europe, Northern Hemisphere, there are plenty of them. A coniferous forest, that's conifers, pines of all sorts. Woodlands, which we have in Australia, the tundra we don't, that's mostly frozen land, but there are plenty of plants and animals that live on top of it. We have grasslands in certain countries which are massive. It's just grass, but a lot of different organisms live there. We have deserts, the tropical savannas, the tropical forests. So as you see, just on land, and this is only a sample, just a few. In the water, in the sea, we have oceanic plankton, and there's a whole group of plankton, and so many variations. Now the balanoids are they're sort of barnacles, and they're all over the world, but they're different and depend on where they are. We have the gastropods. By the way, gastro means stomach, pod means foot. So these snails, slugs, where the stomach's in the leg, they don't have a leg in their foot. These thallophytes, So these are plants without roots. They have no stems, they have no leaves. They are just plants that usually float on water. Then we have these pelecypods. These are the bivalves, like the oysters, that sort of thing. The annelids are the worms. We have corals and massive reefs. So even they're all different. Even if you think about the Great Barrier Reef, goes for thousands of kilometers, and each section is different. Different other fish, other microorganisms, other everything. Just so the biomes are different. Now, a microbiome is a group of genomes of microorganisms. They're different microorganisms.
Sorry, Peter, can I just interrupt you for a minute? All I've got on my screen is the human microbiome.
Oh.
I'm not getting any slides or whatever.
Oh, I've been looking at the slides here. All right.
What am I doing? Am I doing something wrong? Or
no, I probably. Try this one.
no, now I can.
Hang on, where'd it go?
Dubin, can you make the screen bigger? Because I get your slides 1 to 8 on the side. I'm not sure of your screen.
Oh.
Yeah, I can see 1 to 8 on my screen. Yeah, like I can see your whole top thing and everything. Yeah, it's just
I don't know what's happening. All right, I'll
sorry.
I've got that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, now we're right.
All right, you know what? I will. Okay, share. Where is the original? I've got 2 to select from. I don't know which one it is. Okay, I'll try. You've got that?
Yes, it's gone back to that page again.
Yeah, okay.
Your page.
Now see application. And it comes back to that.
Yes, that's it.
Share. I'll try the other one. Share screen.
The last one was right.
Ruben,
Yeah,
it was right.
The
Yeah,
last one was right.
Yeah.
The last one was right.
Yeah, the last one.
Yeah, but it didn't move on. Okay. Oh, I'll try that again. All right.
Yes, that's it.
Okay, that's working now.
Yes, that's it.
I really don't know what I did or what I didn't do. Well, I've got to get my head together now. All right, so we have so the microbiome. These are groups of organisms that we need a microscope to see with, and they have a collective of genomes. Now, a genome is the DNA of each of these groups. And so we have this massive collection of DNA, but they're all different. And they reside and they live in a particular environment, we call a niche, environmental niche. All the microorganisms on their own. So that is called a microbiome. It's this collection of microorganisms that are different and they live together. The biota, the microbiota, is the ecological community, if you like. And there are all sorts of different names, like commensals, where they live nicely, but they don't affect anybody else. The symbiotic ones where they actually help each other, or some of them are pathogenic, and they're all found in everything. They're found in all animals, they're found in all plants. So they all have these microbiota. Microbiota, by the way, is the plural of microbiome. they are everywhere. Now, commensalism, I just mentioned, it's an interaction, a biological one, where the members of one species benefit while the other species isn't affected at all. And that happens as well. So, okay, there's another talk I give on microbiology, which I have given over, and we talked about that. Now, the human microbiome is an aggregate. It's a combination of all these microbiota, and they are inside us, within tissues. They're also outside of us, all over us. And and the types of microbiota that we have are the bacteria. Now, the archaea, they're a form of bacteria, but much more recently evolved. And they're the ones that generally can live in extreme conditions, like in boiling mud pools or whatever. There are also fungi that live in us, on us. The protists, hopefully not too many, like amoeba, and of course viruses. Now, they all contain some sort of DNA or RNA, and they're all and the numbers are ridiculous. They're huge. So it's estimated that we have about 10 trillion cells, and we have about 10 times that number of microorganisms in us. So that means about 100 trillion cells. Now, if you're not sure what a trillion is, it's a million, it's 1,000 billion. 1,000 billion. So we're talking big numbers here. So where are they? They are on our skin. They are on our mammary glands, which is important because when babies are breastfed, they pick up these important bacteria. They are on the placenta. They are in seminal fluid for the sperm. They are found in the uterus, in the vagina. And the vagina is very important because that's how babies under normal conditions of birth pick up many very important bacteria. In ovarian follicles, in the lungs, in saliva, in the mouth, in the conjunctiva, on the surface of our eyes, in the biliary duct, that means between the liver and the duodenum, there's a duct where the bile goes. There are plenty of bacteria there, and in our gut, of course. So we have about 1,000 different species of microorganisms that are able to live within our gut system. And most of them have, and that's only one section of the gut, by the way, that they've been testing. They haven't really, I haven't been able to find other parts of the gut that, besides the one they've been testing, where they have other bacteria. So there could be up to 1,000 different species in us and on us, but it's generally a lot smaller than that. So, so some examples before we get into more detail. So it's very important to understand why we have these relationships, the symbiotic relationships. That means everyone benefits, and I've selected 3. So the gut, the skin, and the vagina. Now, we thought that all plants and animals have gut microorganisms, and now we know that some animals don't have them in the gut. They have them elsewhere, but not in the gut. So bats and birds and many insects don't have the microbiome. in their gut. But plants have a huge number of plants have this microbiome around their roots, and they supply them. For example, all plants need nitrogen, so they're able to produce the proteins that they need. And so they have a microbiome around their roots and in the soil a little bit higher up that take environmental nitrogen and convert them to nitrites, and then others to convert the nitrites to nitrates. That's by adding an extra oxygen each time. And then they move them in, those nitrates then move into the roots of the trees, the plants, and then they move around where the proteins are made. You can't make protein without the nitrogen. And the plant itself can't access the nitrogen out of the atmosphere. Now, some animals, they lack this microbiome, but it's a rare situation, but they lack this at certain life stages. So honeybees, the larvae of, lack them. They don't have them. And I couldn't find out why or when they pick it up, but they don't have them. And I can't even imagine why someone would start looking around for a microbiome in a honeybee larva, but it was just interesting. I found that. So we have evolved for millions and with our microbes, millions of years, and they have evolved into playing very, very important roles in us. So we would not survive easily without our gut microbiome. It is so, so important. So they are found mostly in the ascending colon. Now the colon is our large intestine, and it's got a section which I showed last time, where the cecum and the appendix is. On the right-hand side, it goes up a bit, that's ascending colon, a bit going across, which is the transverse colon, and a bit coming down. So the ascending colon is the part that's been studied a lot, and it's a huge number of our microbiome. So as soon as we're born, it starts affecting us, and we pick them up through the birth process. So, sorry, I've got a problem today. So when we pass through the vagina, through the birth canal, I've said before, we pick them up, and now there's evidence, this is new, that there's some microbes actually in the uterus while the fetus is developing. And of course, it's drinking, it's gulping and swallowing amniotic fluid in which these bacteria exist. The bacteria stay in the gut, and the baby, the fetus, produces urine, and that's fine, just keeps everything moving. Now this is interesting. Babies born using cesarean section are now given a skin swab of their vaginas, of the mother's vaginal microbiome. And they've been doing that for a while because they realized how important the bacteria, the microbiome in the mother's vagina is necessary for the baby's microbiome system to get going. Okay, so they swab and move it on to the baby around the mouth, so around the skin. Now, as we grow, our microbiome diversifies. So we can get, and they found that as we get older, we get different types of species going through. And the higher the diversity, the better for our health. Now, the food that we eat affects this diversity. So if you eat food that is not suitable or not useful, or you don't get the variety of food, especially in the vegetable, the plant food material is important. It affects the diversity, it affects the numbers of gut bacteria. So it's all interlinked. So as the microbiome grows, it affects the body. How? So in digesting breast milk, and don't forget, it's said right at the beginning that breast tissue has bacteria growing on it, and this is how the babies get the bifidobacteria, and these help digest the sugars. Because and I didn't know this when I was researching this. They say there are more than 30 oligosaccharides in breast milk, and the babies need these bacteria, the bifidobacteria, to digest these. Now, an oligosaccharide means sugars up to 100 sugars, glucose molecules long. Up to, you get the word oligo, but if you see it, it just means up to 100. And if you have low counts of the bifidobacteria, all sorts of diseases occur, especially in babies. So they have to give them these supplements. Now, if there's an imbalance of healthy and unhealthy microbes, and this is called gut dysbiosis, or maybe dysbiosis, I think it's dysbiosis, and many people gain weight because of this, and it's usually because of the food that they eat or don't eat. And so we have a number of studies. They looked at identical twins, and what they've done, that one was obese and one wasn't obese, and their microbiomes were different. It's not a genetic thing. Identical twins have identical genome. The genetics are the same, but to be obese and not obese with identical twins, it's not the genetics, it's the microbiome that's different. So in one study that took the microbiome from the obese twin and transferred it to mice, and the mice gained more weight than those from the lean twin, other mice. So that was a really important experiment. Okay, so the importance of the microbiome to our health, in this case mice, well, it showed in the mice, but for the people, it's very obvious. So digesting fiber, we get bacteria that digest our fiber, and the different sorts of fiber, but they produce short chain fatty acids. And these are very, very important to the gut health. So we have bacteria that look after the gut health itself, not just every other part of us. And it also that prevent heart disease, diabetes, brain health, we'll get to that later, weight gain, and also the risk of cancer. So this sentence is the whole reason I'm doing this talk, is because it's just so important that we have a really good mixture of microorganisms and healthy microorganisms that are useful to us to keep our health going. So they found that the gut microbiome, there's evidence to show, some evidence to show heart health. They found in about 1,500 people that it played a role in promoting good high density lipoproteins, cholesterol, and triglycerides. Now, the HDLs and triglycerides are very important for the heart. The low densities, they're the ones that form the plaques, which they cause heart attacks and other issues. All right, so what happens in our arteries can go back to the type of microbiome that we have. And then we have the certain unhealthy species in the microbiome could also affect the heart by producing this TMAO. So it's trimethylamine or methylamine N for nitrogen oxide. And what it does, TMAO, it contributes to blocked arteries. So if you have these, what they call unhealthy species, it affects what I said before, back here, the HDLs and the LDLs.
Peter, Ruben, sorry,
Yeah.
have they ever identified, or are they endeavouring to identify which of the microbiome are involved in these sorts of health issues, whether it's weight or whether it's heart, artery, and so on?
Yeah, a wonderful question from a chemist. I haven't read anything on it of specific ones. I'm not sure how they would have to take the hundreds of bacteria and then plate them individually out and see what they produce and then test what they produce. I don't know if any of that or even some of it's been done. I just haven't seen anything. But then I don't have the time to go into the academic papers to follow that up. And there's something for you, Peter. Would you like to chase that one up? I can't hear you.
I'll do some research.
Lovely. I look forward to it.
But then why can't we why can't people take a whole range of microbiome and hope that some of them are good for these sort of conditions? So
well, they do. It happens. I'll get to it later with fecal transplants.
yeah,
People
sure.
are really sick because the poor microbiome.
Yeah,
They get rid of what they've got and they get a fecal transplant and they become healthy again.
yeah,
But that's a gross thing. It's a mass thing. You can also get certain bacteria. Well, it's really fecal now. Rather than putting the feces up through the rectum, they desiccate the bacteria. They dry them out, put them into a capsule.
yeah.
And that doesn't dissolve until it gets to the colon.
Yeah,
So that's much easier. Taking a capsule, or I don't have any, rather than going through the process of an enema and then a fecal transplant. But it may not work unless you get an enema first. So it's more of the gastrointestinal doctors that have to work on that aspect, I think. But a good question, thanks. So we have this microbiome, the bacteria that convert choline. Now, acetylcholine is one of the very important enzymes in the body, and they're converted from choline to this carnitine. And they're both found in red meat and other bases. And they convert these to TMAO. So there's evidence that people who eat a lot of red meat have much more TMAO in their system and leads to heart disease. So, but they only found them in animal-based foods, not in plant-based foods. So again, you need to be aware of how much you're actually eating of, especially red meat. Chicken doesn't seem to have a problem. Chicken, turkey, that sort of thing. But when you get to beef, and I'm not sure about lamb, but I think it's probably shown there too. So the gut microbiome can control blood sugar, which could affect types 1 and 2 diabetes. So they looked at the 33 infants who had a genetically high risk of developing type 1 diabetes. And it found that, this is so interesting, that I would just read it, diversity of microbiome dropped. The diversity dropped suddenly before the onset of type 1 diabetes. And they found that several unhealthy bacteria increased just before the onset. So two things are happening. The diversity drops and the unhealthy ones stay behind. And I have no idea why this happens. But anyway, so, and then there was another study, and when people ate exactly the same foods, their blood sugar varied. And the hypothesis at the moment is the type of bacteria in the gut. So, some people can eat cake and all sorts of sugars and fats and remain fairly thin. Other people walk past a cake shop and put on half a kilo, and why it's all related, and there's a lot of ongoing work here. I don't have all that information, of course. So the other thing is the psychology is affected, the brain health, and I include this in several ways. So that can produce, the bacteria can produce certain chemicals called neurotransmitters. Now, I have to explain. Neurotransmitters, these are chemicals that move down the nerves. They're produced in the brain or other parts of the body, and they send messages. Neuronerve transmitters, they send messages, and and they support the brain. Now, this is happening constantly within the brain and from the brain out. Also, from the body to the brain. We send messages constantly. So if you touch something hot, or you put your hand in warm water, the body knows, the brain knows what you're doing. So the messages must be coming from the hand to the brain. So it works both ways. Now, so serotonin is an antidepressant neurotransmitter that's mostly made in the gut. So here's a very strong example of the effect of a microbiome on our mental health. Now, you've heard of serotonin, I'm sure all of you have, but it's an antidepressant, but it's mostly made in the gut. It's affected in the brain, but it's not made there. And the gut is physically connected to the brain through millions of nerves. So we have a direct link from the gut to the brain, nerve-wise. So the gut microbiome also affects the brain health, controlling messages, sending messages to the brain through these neural pathways. So there were studies that showed psychological disorders have different species. So the people with these disorders, different species of bacteria in their gut compared to healthy people. So there's another little bit of evidence, but it's unclear how it's simply due that there's not enough information yet. Is it the diet? Is it the lifestyle? Is it the amount of alcohol? Is it, I don't know what. So I haven't found any evidence, and I have found this said a number of times where they just don't know. And our human microbiome can impact on cancer initiation, the progression of the cancer, and the response to therapy, including immunotherapy. How? Who knows? So the mechanisms, if once I work it out, can yield new diagnostics and treatments. But it's all in the unknown. But we got this far so far that we know that there is a link between the microbiome and cancer. There's the gut dysbiosis where you get you don't get it. It's an imbalance in the gut population. There may be a potential link with cancer risk, aging, and inflammation. So you get inflammations around the body, which is not a good thing to get. So Helicobacter pylori, we spoke about it last time. That's the one that the guys in Perth discovered caused stomach ulcers. Fusobacteria, I don't know what they do, and other pathogens they may also increase colorectal cancer. It's further down, colon and rectum cancer. So as you see that, as we build up a picture of what these guys, these bacteria, how they affect us in every way is amazing. It also controls our immune system. I just bold this massive, and and the communication within the immune system through the large intestine wall control how we respond to infection. Don't ask me how it's done. I haven't got a clue. But there's a lot of evidence now that this happens. But what happens next, we're not sure. I'm definitely not sure, but I haven't found anything. So, as an example, HPV, that's a human papillomavirus, and the Helicobacter pylori I mentioned, they've been demonstrated to be causative agents in cancers, certain cancers. So we're finding out new things all the time. Now the skin flora, that means the microbiome on our skin is big also. So that mostly found on the superficial layers. We have a number of layers within our skin, and the superficial layer is just the outside. And in the top part of hair follicles. Now follicles like a little hole, a little cavity in the skin where the hair grows out of. So the top bit has this. Now, if you remember when you were teenagers, if you were teenagers, you had pimples, you had blackheads, and that's in the follicles. And the by the way, the pimples, the yellow material that when you squeeze it pop out, they're dead white blood cells, leukocytes, that are fighting the bacteria. Now, chicken skin has a very large population of some really nasty bacteria, and salmonella is the worst. So you must ensure that chickens are really, really well cooked. So when they, people handle chicken skin, raw chicken, you have to wash your hands, you have to do everything so well. People get really, really sick if they eat undercooked salmonella. Even if the skin's not there, bacteria end up on the food, on the chicken. Now I looked up turkey, and they didn't mention turkey, they didn't mention duck anywhere that I could find. So I'm not sure what it is about chicken and salmonella, but that may well be to the chicken's benefit. Not when it's dead, of course, but while it's moving around, something there. Now, skin microbiota and adaptive immunity. So we have two different forms of immunity, and at 3 levels. Innate, we have external immunity, like skin. We have the various fluids in our body, like saliva, sweat, tears. It's all part of the first level of immunity. The second level of immunity is what's called the innate immunity, where if bacteria or something gets under the skin, I've got a whole talk on this, so I won't do it now, but we have the capacity to get rid of things quite quickly. The non-specific, whatever's there, it'll be attacked. But if the innate system doesn't work properly, then the adaptive immune system comes in, where we produce antibodies. And and so these two, the innate and the adaptive immune systems within the body, the skin microbiota promotes these responses internally, and so it limits to limit pathogen invasion and maintain homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is the normal ongoing balance of everything in the body, like temperature, level of water, level of oxygen, everything within us. That's homeostatic. There are lots of mechanisms there. Mice without adaptive immunity, where they knock out the B cells and the T cells, so mice without this, they fail to control their skin microbiota. So you get pathogenic microbes invading the mice. So there's another link there. Now, the composition of skin microbiota can shift depending, during inflammation. So again, they don't know, it's not understood how these pathogens and skin inflammation contribute to each other, and how homeostasis is reestablished once inflammation is gone, or how the pathogens interact with the commensal population, that's existing bacteria that's in us and on us, and pathogens are other bacteria which are nasty. And again, there's so much unknown yet. We know a lot, but there's a lot we don't know. The vaginal microbiota can help prevent urogenital conditions such as STIs, yeast infections, the urinary tract infections, bacterial vaginosis, that's inflammation and overgrowth of bacteria which are naturally found. So the vaginal microbiota is so important for the health of the woman. And the microbiota is very significant in protecting the host, the woman, from disease. Now, within the vagina, there's a number of bacteria, and there's also a particular fungus, a mold that lives there. And the bacteria maintain a certain pH within the vagina, which keeps that mold at a particular level. It doesn't grow. Now, a woman who takes a lot of antibiotics could kill off a large number of these bacteria. The pH is then changed to benefit the mold. The mold grows, and so the woman gets, the word escapes me, so a fungal growth in the vagina, and there's a name for it. I can't think of it. Okay, so so the bacteria in the vagina are thought to be the first line of defense against vaginal infection, and as a result, both competitive exclusion and direct killing of other pathogenic microbes. Now, it happens in the vagina, but they haven't found it that it happens in the skin, on the skin. And and disruption of this, of course, has been linked to pelvic inflammation as well, miscarriages, and premature birth. By the way, they don't know what the link is. In asymptomatic healthy women, several kinds of vaginal microbiota exist, and the majority often are dominated by lactobacillus. And the lactobacillus are the bacteria that break down sugars in milk. And and others compromise a diverse array of anaerobic microorganisms. So that's useful. There's this Candida albicans. That's the fungus in the skin, in the mouth, in the digestive tract, and the vagina, which is normal. And this healthier combination is a very, very important part of the system. But there's the word. If thrush is the word I could think of before. If this yeast, if you like, mold, grows due to lack of bacteria, like change of pH, then this infection is called thrush. And apparently it's not comfortable, it's very itchy, but it's treatable. Now, a healthy vagina maintains an appropriate pH, as I mentioned before, to keep this Candida albicans under control. That's the fungus. So a normal pH, a vaginal pH, is between 3.8 and 4.5, so slightly acidic. Anything above that, the yeast goes crazy. Now, a woman taking antibiotics, I mentioned that just before, will kill off a large amount of its population and leading to thrush. And so the condition, vaginal candidiasis, is usually treated with antifungal medicine. I don't know whether it's oral or Peter, you can help me here.
Both, you can get oral and local.
It is.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Now, so this is the effect of diet on the gut. So what we eat. So the gut microbiota is variable between individuals. We each have a different composition. There may be hundreds of different species in each of our guts, but there's variation. But there are bacterial species which are present in virtually everybody. So there are gut microbiota depending on the diet, this gut microbiota is shaped by a combination of extrinsic and intrinsic factors. So extrinsic, like outside the body, lifestyle, medication, and intrinsic is the genetics, the immune system, metabolic regulations within the body. And so there's a nice combination there. And what we've got to do is look at the diet. So diet seems to elicit the greatest effect on the composition of this microbiome. The genetics, a limited role. after I mentioned the identical twins tests, and it may have some effect, and I haven't found anything on that. But the composition is highly individualized, as I mentioned, and it's shaped after a lifetime of unique makeup. Okay, so, and it starts at birth. But as we get older, you know, when we're kids, when we're teenagers, when we're young adults, we're middle-aged, older, our diet does change, and that affects, to some degree, our microbiota makeup. But there are certain bacteria in there that seem to stay there during your lifetime. So the gut microbes, they actually program their metabolism to suit the intestinal conditions and convert whatever you eat into the smaller molecules that ultimately affect the physiology of the host. Okay, so the enzymes in our digestive system do break things down, but there are certain things which those enzymes don't touch. And by the time we get to the large intestine, where the microbiome is, they're broken down further, and then the molecules that are produced affect things. So this is, if any of you are vegetarians or vegans, you might find this interesting. And so after fecal studies of omnivores, that means people who eat anything, vegetarians and vegans, and the difference is, of course, the vegans don't eat any animal products, including eggs and milk. They found the vegans and vegetarian diets are associated with the highest abundance of microbial genes and proteins responsible for carbohydrate and protein hydrolyzing enzymes and the synthesis of essential amino acids and vitamins. The highest abundance of variety. The microbial cells and flagellum extracted, and that flagellum is some of the bacteria have little tails, and they're with them around, and they also have cilia. Anything that helps it move, it's a protein. So this flagellum extracted from fecal samples reduce the viability of the human colon carcinoma cells. So vegans and vegetarians seem to have a much smaller chance of getting colon cancer than people who eat meat. So in nice big letters, the more plant material a person eats, the healthier they are. So, you know, red meat once a week, chicken or something once, twice a week. The tofu is excellent. So, in conclusion, in recent research, they found the gut microbiome has a role in reducing risk factors in metabolic and immune-mediated diseases like inflammatory bowel disease. Okay, so if you have the right microbiome, the risk is reduced of that. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, autoimmune psoriasis and arthritis, and cancer. Psoriasis is a form of skin disease there are two sorts, but generally the autoimmune, where the body reacts against the skin. And it's also well known that a diet rich in fruit and vegetables with reduced meat, and it's massive in modulating the composition and function of the gut microbiome. But here we are. Little is known about the possible therapeutic use of modulating the gut microbiome through dietary components. So we don't know. I don't know why they don't know. But therapeutically, if you have you develop colon cancer by changing your diet, will it affect the cancer or not? Will it help it or not affect it at all? Now,
Probably a
is-
little bit late by then, Ruben.
it is. That's right. That's what we're talking about therapeutic. They're trying to find things. You're absolutely right there. This is an interesting article I found for you to read. It's in the notes. They found some 2,000-year-old poo, and they were able to get the genomes of many bacteria in that poo, and compared it to different lifestyles in our current world. People who live, say, in Africa or in Asia, and they don't have any macas, they don't have any modern food, they live off the land. Aborigines, for example, I don't know if we have any Aborigines now who just live off the land, but in other parts of the world they do. So that's a very interesting article to read. And here's another one about fecal transplants. But they also found, this is fascinating, I'm trying to remember whether this is, yeah, there it is there. So this is a very interesting article about the transplants affect certain traits of the donor of the donor of the feces because of the bacteria in them. And now here's a TED talk. We've got time. It's yeah, a lot of time. So if you like, I'm happy to play it, or you can listen to it yourselves. But if you've got the time, are you okay if I put it on?
Before you go on, Ruben, can you sort of make a comment on the supplements which people take, if they are part of a diet, or no, with vitamins or chemical minerals and what have you?
Yep. All I know is that some people require, for example, vitamin D. Some people don't manufacture enough vitamin D through the skin, and so my wife and I, because we sort of sun phobic, we do not sunbake, and we wear a hat when we go out. Our vitamin D has been low to some degree, so we take a small capsule of vitamin D. Yeah, that's essential. All our vitamin minerals can be traced, the levels traced through blood testing, and the doctor might suggest that you take extra calcium or some vitamin or something. That is a necessity to keep the body operational. Now, some people take what they call supplements for some other reason besides medical. I don't know what it affects, but it may well affect the microbiome. Now, if you start knocking off your microbiome, some of the if you've got hundreds of species, some of the hundreds would be species which are not good for you. That could be quite detrimental. The good species usually keep the others under control, but depending on what anything untoward that you take, which might affect the good ones, then the bad ones, the ones that are not good for you, will take over. And I don't know
Well then,
Ruben, just a quick question. Sorry, you finished?
Are they right? Yes.
Okay. Look, we were talking about that, well, chemical, whichever is produced by eating red meat.
Yes.
Now, if the vegans and vegetarians, okay, they normal, well, not normally, but some of them go into the low ferritin count. By taking the like iron tablets or any supplements to bump it up a little bit, does that supplement play the same role as eating the red meat in regards to forming that chemical, you know, that
I think
an idea?
to the best of my knowledge, if you take an iron supplement, you're not taking the carrier molecule. You're just taking the.
Okay.
So that molecule that's broken down isn't in the capsule.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
But again, if Peter wants to comment, Peter's a pharmacist, so
Okay.
retired. Peter, do you know what the how iron tablets come or iron capsules?
I don't quite understand the question.
In an iron tablet,
Yeah.
whichever form it comes, is there anything else? Is there some sort of a carrier?
No. Iron. If you're taking iron tablets or capsules, you need vitamin C to help transport it through the gut. So usually people have some vitamin C in them anyway. But if you really want to get the best benefit out of the iron, you would take a capsule that contains the two, vitamin C and iron, or separately. Does that answer the question?
Not really. What
No.
I was wondering, you know, if you read, I can't remember exactly the abbreviation of that substance, which
Yeah.
can sort of cause or contribute to you know, developing cancer, colon cancer, if you eat a lot of red meat. But, you know, in vegans and vegetarians, if they don't eat red meat, their iron level or ferritin level drops. So by supplementing eating the red meat, if they take like a supplement in capsule or whatever,
Yeah.
will that have the same effect to the developing or that chemical which, you know, causes the cancer, or is it a different method of that's a bit difficult. Is it, well, it will help you to bump up your iron level, but will that have the same effect on your on developing the developing the colon cancer?
Well, it's not the lack or excess of iron that causes the cancer, is it?
No, that's right. But you know what I'm saying, red meat versus the supplement.
Yeah. Well, firstly, vegetarians do get some iron from various vegetables.
Yeah, but you know, it's not.
But if you want to supplement, yeah, if you don't eat the right vegetables and gets, you know, enough iron, then you can take a supplement, and that won't affect your cancer at all.
No, it won't. No. It's, yeah, but it's sort of, it's not causing the cancer, but it can cause the developing, you know, it can increase the chances of developing a colon cancer by eating red meat. Will that be the same action of the supplement as
no, I would say no, definitely not. No.
Okay.
I thought too, yeah.
Yeah, that's what that's what Ruben sort of mentioned. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that answered my question. Thank you.
Eugene.
Yes, one more little sideline. You were saying a baby who is breastfed gets 30 or whatever number of beneficial bacteria, whatever. Would the same sort of same substances be put into formulas which kids would, young babies would have?
I don't think so.
No, they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't. That's why they recommend that breastfeeding is much better than bottle fed.
Yeah.
But I think eventually, mostly, the child or the babies will develop the right microbes anyway.
I think they catch up,
Yeah.
but there'll be different species.
What?
And what I said before about having a cesarean, the baby normally picks up a large number of bacteria coming through the vaginal canal, through the vagina. But if it's coming out through a cesarean operation, they have to actually give a swab, a skin swab from the mother, a vaginal swab, around the baby's mouth, and it just licks it in.
Okay.
So yeah, thanks guys, that was good. So I'll put this on. It's a TED talk. It goes for about a quarter of an hour, and then it'll take us through. Okay, so better. I better stop that. Hang on. Share screen, that's better. There. You hear that?
We humans have always been very concerned about the health of our bodies, but we haven't always been that good at figuring out what's important. Take the ancient Egyptians, for example, very concerned about the body parts they thought they needed in the afterlife, but they left some parts out. This part, for example. Although they very carefully preserved the stomach, the lungs, the liver, and so forth, they just mushed up the brain, drained it out through the nose, and threw it away. Which makes sense, really, because what does the brain do for us anyway? But imagine if there were a kind of neglected organ in our bodies that weighed just as much as the brain, and in some ways was just as important to who we are, that we knew so little about and treated with such disregard. And imagine if, through new scientific advances, we were just beginning to understand its importance to how we think of ourselves. Wouldn't you want to know more about it? Well, it turns out that we do have something just like that. Our gut. Or rather, its microbes. But it's not just the microbes in our gut that are important. Microbes all over our body turn out to be really critical to a whole range of differences that make different people who we are. So, for example, have you ever noticed how some people get bitten by mosquitoes way more often than others? It turns out that everyone's anecdotal experience out camping is actually true. For example, I seldom get bitten by mosquitoes, but my partner Amanda attracts them in droves. And the reason why is that we have different microbes on our skin that produce different chemicals that the mosquitoes detect. Now, microbes are also really important in the field of medicine. So, for example, what microbes you have in your gut determine whether particular painkillers are toxic to your liver. They also determine whether or not other drugs will work for your heart condition. And if you're a fruit fly, at least, your microbes determine who you want to have sex with. We haven't demonstrated this in humans yet, but maybe it's just a matter of time before we find out. So our microbes are performing a huge range of functions. They help us digest our food, they help educate our immune system, they help us resist disease, and they may even be affecting our behavior. So what would a map of all these microbial communities look like? Well, it wouldn't look exactly like this, but it's a helpful guide for understanding biodiversity. Different parts of the world have different landscapes and organisms that are immediately characteristic of one place or another or another. With microbiology, it's kind of the same, although I've got to be honest with you, all the microbes essentially look the same under a microscope. So instead of trying to identify them visually, what we do is we look at their DNA sequences. And in a project called the Human Microbiome Project, NIH funded this $173 million project where hundreds of researchers came together to map out all the A's, T's, G's, and C's in all of these microbes in the human body. And so when we take them together, they look like this. It's a bit more difficult to tell who lives where now, isn't it? What my lab does is develop computational techniques that allow us to take all these terabytes of sequence data and turn them into something that's a bit more useful as a map. And so when we do that with the human microbiome data from 250 healthy volunteers, it looks like this. Each point here represents all the complex microbes in an entire microbial community. See, I told you they basically all look the same. So what we're looking at is each point represents one microbial community from one body site of one healthy volunteer. And so you can see that there's different parts of the map in different colors, almost like separate continents. And what it turns out to be is that those, as the different regions of the body have very different microbes in them. So what we have is we have the oral community up there in green. Over on the other side, we have the skin community in blue, the vaginal community in purple, and then right down at the bottom, we have the fecal community in brown. And we've just over the last few years found out that the microbes in different parts of the body are amazingly different from one another. So if I look at just one person's microbes in the mouth and in the gut, it turns out that the difference between those two microbial communities is enormous. It's bigger than the difference between the microbes in this reef and the microbes in this prairie, right? So this is incredible when you think about it. What it means is that a few feet of difference in the human body makes more of a difference to your microbial ecology than hundreds of miles on Earth. And this is not to say that two people look basically the same in the same body habitat either. So you probably heard that we're all pretty much the same in terms of our human DNA. You're 99.99% identical in terms of your human DNA to the person sitting next to you. But that's not true of your gut microbes. You might only share 10% similarity with the person sitting next to you in terms of your gut microbes. So that's as different as the bacteria in this prairie and the bacteria in this forest. So these different microbes have all these different kinds of functions that I told you about, everything from digesting food to involvement in different kinds of diseases, metabolizing drugs, and so forth. So how do they do all this stuff? Well, in part it's because although there's just 3 pounds of those microbes in our gut, they really outnumber us. And so how much do they outnumber us? Well, it depends on what you think of as our bodies. Is it our cells? Well, each of us consists of about 10 trillion human cells, but we harbor as many as 100 trillion microbial cells, so they outnumber us 10 to 1. Now, you might think, well, we're human because of our DNA, but it turns out that each of us has about 20,000 human genes, depending on what you count exactly, but as many as 2 to 20 million microbial genes. So whichever way we look at it, we're vastly outnumbered by our microbial symbionts. And it turns out that in addition to traces of our human DNA, we also leave traces of our microbial DNA on everything we touch. We showed in a study a few years ago that you can actually match the palm of someone's hand up to the computer mouse that they use routinely with up to 95% accuracy. So this came out in a scientific journal a few years ago, but more importantly, it was featured on CSI Miami, so you really know it's true. So where do our microbes come from in the first place? Well, if as I do, you have dogs or kids, you probably have some dark suspicions about that. All of which are true, by the way. So just like we can match you to your computer equipment up by the microbes you share, we can also match you up to your dog. But it turns out that in adults, microbial communities are relatively stable. So even if you live together with someone, you'll maintain your separate microbial identity over a period of weeks, months, even years. It turns out that our first microbial communities depend a lot on how we're born. So babies that come out the regular way, all of their microbes basically look like the vaginal community, whereas babies that are delivered by C-section, all of their microbes instead look like skin. And this might be associated with some of the differences in health associated with cesarean birth, such as more asthma, more allergies, even more obesity, all of which have been linked to microbes now. And when you think about it, until recently, every surviving mammal had been delivered via the birth canal. And so the lack of those protective microbes that we've co-evolved with might be really important for a lot of these different conditions that we now know involve the microbiome. When my own daughter was born a couple of years ago by emergency C-section, we took matters into our own hands and made sure she was coated with those vaginal microbes that she would have got naturally. Now, it's really difficult to tell whether this has had an effect on her health specifically, right? With a sample size of just one child, no matter how much we love her, you don't really have enough of a sample size to figure out what happens on average. But at 2 years old, she hasn't had an ear infection yet, so we're keeping our fingers crossed on that one. And what's more, we're starting to do clinical trials with more children to figure out whether this has a protective effect generally. So how we're born has a tremendous effect on what microbes we have initially, but where do we go after that? What I'm showing you again here is this map of the Human Microbiome Project data. So each point represents a sample from one body site from one of 250 healthy adults. And you've seen children develop physically, you've seen them develop mentally. Now, for the first time, you're going to see one of my colleagues' children develop microbially. So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at this one baby's stool, the fecal community, which represents the gut, sampled every week for almost 2.5 years. And so we're starting on day 1. What's going to happen is that the infant is going to start off as this yellow dot. And you can see that he's starting off basically in the vaginal community, as we would expect from his delivery mode. And what's going to happen over these 2.5 years is he's going to travel all the way down to resemble the adult fecal community from healthy volunteers down at the bottom. So I'm just going to start this going, and we'll see how that happens. What you can see, remember each step in this is just 1 week. What you can see is that week to week, the change in the microbial community of the feces of this one child, the differences week to week are much greater than the differences between individual healthy adults in the Human Microbiome Project cohort, which are those brown dots down at the bottom. And you can see he's starting to approach the adult fecal community. This is up to about 2 years. But something amazing is about to happen here. So he's getting antibiotics for an ear infection. What you can see is this huge change in the community, followed by relatively rapid recovery. I'll just rewind that for you. And what we can see is that just over these few weeks, we have a much more radical change, a setback of many months of normal development, followed by a relatively rapid recovery. And by the time he reaches day 838, which is the end of this video, you can see that he's essentially reached the healthy adult stool community, despite that antibiotic intervention. So this is really interesting because it raises fundamental questions about what happens when we intervene at different ages in a child's life, right? So does what we do early on, where the microbiome is changing so rapidly, actually matter? Or is it like throwing a stone into a stormy sea, where the ripples will just be lost? Well, fascinatingly, it turns out that if you give children antibiotics in the first 6 months of life, they're more likely to become obese later on than if they don't get antibiotics then, or only get them later. And so what we do early on may have profound impacts on the gut microbial community and on later health that we're only beginning to understand. And so this is fascinating because one day, in addition to the effects that antibiotics have on antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which are very important, they may also be degrading our gut microbial ecosystems. And so one day we may come to regard antibiotics with the same horror that we currently reserve for those metal tools that the Egyptians used to use to mush up the brains before they drained them out for embalming. So I mentioned that microbes have all these important functions, and they've also now, just over the past few years, been connected to a whole range of different diseases, including inflammatory bowel disease, heart disease, colon cancer, and even obesity. Obesity has a really large effect, as it turns out, and today we can tell whether you're lean or obese with 90% accuracy by looking at the microbes in your gut. Now, although that might sound impressive, in some ways it's a little bit problematic as a medical test, right? Because you can probably tell which of these people is obese without knowing anything about their gut microbes. But it turns out that even if we sequenced their complete genomes and had all their human DNA, we could only predict which one was obese with about 60% accuracy. So that's amazing, right? What it means is that the 3 pounds of microbes that you carry around with you may be more important for some health conditions than every single gene in your genome. And then in mice, we can do a lot more. So in mice, microbes have been linked to all kinds of additional conditions, including things like models of multiple sclerosis, depression, autism, and again, obesity. But how can we tell whether these microbial differences that correlate with disease are cause or effect? Well, one thing we can do is we can raise the mice without any microbes of their own in a germ-free bubble. Then we can add in some microbes that we think are important and see what happens. When we take the microbes from an obese mouse and transplant them into a genetically normal mouse that's been raised in a bubble with no microbes of its own, it becomes fatter than if it got them from a regular mouse. Why this happens is absolutely amazing, though. Sometimes what's going on is that the microbes are helping them digest food more efficiently from the same diet, so they're taking more energy from their food. But other times, the microbes are actually affecting their behavior. What they're doing is they're eating more than a normal mouse, so they only get fat if we let them eat as much as they want. So this is really remarkable, right? The implication is that microbes can affect mammalian behavior. So you might be wondering whether we can also do this sort of thing across species. And it turns out that if you take microbes from an obese person and transplant them into mice that you've raised germ-free, those mice will also become fatter than if they receive the microbes from a lean person. But we can design a microbial community that we inoculate them with that prevents them from gaining this weight. We can also do this for malnutrition. So in a project funded by the Gates Foundation, what we're looking at is children in Malawi who have kwashiorkor, a profound form of malnutrition. And mice that get the kwash community transplanted into them lose 30% of their body mass in just 3 weeks. But we can restore their health by using the same peanut butter-based supplement that's used for the children in the clinic. And the mice that receive the community from the healthy, identical twins of the kwash children do fine. This is truly amazing because it suggests that we can pilot therapies by trying them out in a whole bunch of different mice with individual people's gut communities, and perhaps tailor those therapies all the way down to the individual level. So I think it's really important that everyone has a chance to participate in this discovery. So a couple of years ago, we started this project called American Gut, which allows you to claim a place for yourself on this microbial map. This is now the largest crowd-funded science project that we know of. Over 8,000 people have signed up at this point. What happens is that they send in their samples, we sequence the DNA of their microbes, and then we release the results back to them. We also release them de-identified to scientists, to educators, to interested members of the general public, and so forth, so that anyone can have access to the data. On the other hand, when we do tours of our lab at the Biofrontiers Institute, and we explain that we use robots and lasers to look at poop, it turns out that not everyone wants to know. But I'm guessing that many of you do, and so I brought some kits here if you're interested in trying this out for yourself. So why might we want to do this? Well, it turns out that microbes are not just important for finding out where we are in terms of our health, but they can actually cure disease. This is one of the newest things we've been able to visualize with colleagues at the University of Minnesota. So here's that map of the human microbiome again. And what we're looking at now, I'm going to add in the community of some people with C. diff. So this is a terrible form of diarrhea where you have to go up to 20 times a day. And these people have failed antibiotic therapy for 2 years before they're eligible for this trial. So what would happen if we transplanted some of the stool from a healthy donor, that star down at the bottom, into these patients? Would the good microbes do battle with the bad microbes and help to restore their health? So let's watch exactly what happens there. 4 of those patients are about to get a transplant from that healthy donor at the bottom. And what you can see is that immediately you have this radical change in the gut community. So one day after you do that transplant, all the symptoms clear up, the diarrhea vanishes, and they're essentially healthy again, coming to resemble the donor's community. And they stay there. So we're just at the beginning of this discovery. We're just finding out that microbes have implications for all these different kinds of diseases, ranging from inflammatory bowel disease to obesity, and perhaps even autism and depression. What we need to do, though, is we need to develop a kind of microbial GPS where we not just know where we are currently, but also where we want to go and what we need to do in order to get there. And we need to be able to make this simple enough that even a child can use it. Thank you.
Okay. So.
Start with a little story. So I grew up in this neighborhood when I was.
Okay. That was the next one. I hope you you found that amazing. That yeah. Anyway, you've got the link in your notes at the end, and I think. What do you think? Any comments? Are you any of you changing your diet a little bit? But it was quite. I know, but I couldn't resist showing you that. It was just so well done.
That was quite amazing, Ruben.
Yeah. No, it's good. Happy with that. All right. No comments? So we'll finish early today. time for a cup of tea or coffee or whatever your poison is. And no, it's too early for that. I'll see you in a fortnight's time.
Thank you, Ruben. That was really
Thanks, Ruben.
fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Ruben.
you. Have a good fortnight.
You too. All the very best.
All the best. Bye.
Thank you.
Yes,
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.